Okay, I think we're recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Get Ready to Vote, a special Teachers College Alumni Relations virtual lounge open to the entire TC community and being recorded for your help guiding through the election process and voting process over the next several weeks. And we're super excited to once again be joined by the All In Campus Democracy Challenge with Stephanie King, who will walk us through in a couple of minutes how to get ready to vote. So we are really excited. We've got people here from New York. I think in the room, we've already chatted. People are from New York, Massachusetts, California, Wisconsin. And that is a small snapshot of the TC community, how we're all over the country, all over the world. And we want to be ready to vote, whether we're on campus, off campus, or maybe still registered to vote in our home state and want to vote absentee. And Stephanie will walk us through all those scenarios. So again, my name is Matt Camp. I'm Director of Government Relations and Community Engagement. And we, along with Lauren, Duncan, Maddie, and Steph, run the TC Take Action initiative. And the TC Votes website is really the centerpiece of our Teachers College voting initiative for this fall and year round, actually. And we'll love to share that link with you to take a look at some upcoming events, opportunities, resources, existing videos like this that can help you in your civic engagement journey. We recently had Constitution Day a couple days ago on campus, and that recording will share out. And that was a great way to learn about what's at stake in the election. There's a great series called Education on the Ballot, ran by the Social Studies program, that you could access more information on TC Votes. Encourage people to go for that. And just lastly, TC Teachers College is officially a member of the All In Campus Democracy Challenge, and Stephanie will explain what that means. And we're really happy to share that President Bailey signed on the president's commitment to really deepen our relationship with the democratic process and with All In particular. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you all so much for giving me some space to talk a little bit about preparing for the upcoming election on November 5th. So as Matt had mentioned, my name is Stephanie King. I use the she, her pronoun series, and I'm All In Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives, and I'm here to guide us through a conversation on how you can best prepare to make sure that you're able to exercise your right to vote if you're eligible to do so in this upcoming election. So some things that we'd like to do is that if you're tuning in right now, you can go ahead and scan the QR code right there on your screen, and it'll take you to a prop-up to go ahead and help you register to vote. It'll take you only a few minutes to do so, and we'll walk you through the necessary IDs, regulations, etc., regardless of the state in which you are registering to vote. So just again, a kind reminder that if you're looking to register to vote, now's the time, and you can do it very quickly by scanning the QR code right there on your screen as we get started today. The things that we're going to want to talk about today is just going over kind of the process of where we are in the democratic process, how All In Campus Democracy Challenge can be a support to you all, why we hope that as many people, college students in particular, will turn out to vote this year. We want to make sure that you all make an informed decision based on your values without influence from others regarding the political party or the candidates in which you are voting for. We want to make sure that we're preparing people to register to vote, and then also to make sure that we have conversations around the tactics to encourage our peers to do so. We'll leave with a few takeaways and resources, and of course, we'll share these with the Teachers College community to ensure that you all have information beyond today's conversation. And then lastly, for folks that are present with us, we'll make sure to spend some time with a little bit of Q&A to ensure all of your questions are answered before we leave today's conversation. So first and foremost, as Matt had mentioned, that the Teachers College is a member of the All In Campus Democracy Challenge community. Right now, we support a network of more than 1,000 campuses, closer to 1,100 at this present time. And our intended purpose is to really help colleges and universities institutionalize nonpartisan democratic engagement, being civic learning, political participation, and student voter engagement. The ways in which we work with campuses is kind of year-round and sits on the tenets of structure, support, and recognition, but really aims at ensuring that all college students that are at our participating institutions understand their rights to engage in elections and also think broadly about civic engagement, not just in the present moment as we gear up towards the 2024 presidential election, but how do you best prepare the foundation for 2025 elections, 2026, and so forth. So trying to make sure all of your students know their rights and are able to vote in any election, local, state, and federal. So how do we do the work that we do? It's with you. So we really think about college students as the epicenter of our work and ensuring that you understand your own civic values and that you understand the processes and regulations that enable you to engage in our communities at large. So this fall, we are preparing for the presidential election, but it's not just that that's going to be on the ballot. You also have 34 Senate seats and 435 congressional seats that are up for election. So really know that there's more than just the top 2 president and vice president on the ballot. There's a lot more when you start to go down ballot that folks are eligible to exercise their voice in the democratic process there. There's also more than 4 million young people that'll be turning 18 for the first time this year, which means we'll have a new set of first-time voters. We will also have people that are voting for the first time in a presidential election, even though they may have voted in a midterm election this past 2 years, or if they voted in a state election in 2023. So lots of new people are engaging and younger people are engaging in the presidential process as well as in the electoral process at large. So know that that could make a big movement in whether a candidate in a local seat in particular is elected to office and whether issues move forward at a present time for folks. The other thing that we want to be mindful of is that everyone needs to vote in what interests align with them. So to making sure to really take a look at who is going to be on your ballot and their political ideologies and how that connects to you as a person. So we want to make sure that you know your values so you can ground yourself and energize yourself in who you're voting for and what you're voting for this election cycle. We also want to make sure that you're able to have persuasive conversations with your peers and with your family members and with your community about why you find it important to vote, and that you're able to encourage others to find their voice and their passion about why they want to turn out to vote. Not that you're influencing who or what they vote for, but that they understand their rights and their opportunities to engage for the things that they care about. And we also want to push towards a common goal that all young people, that 16 million in particular, that are going to be first-time voters, know their rights to turn out to vote and that they choose to do so. So they move from registration into actualization of their vote. The ways in which that we do this that's really helpful for college students is that we run a platform known as allintovote.org. And I'm going to walk through this series of opportunities for folks in just a moment. But this is a one-stop shop for individuals to navigate the voting process. So as Matt mentioned at the outset, you might be voting in Massachusetts or New York or California, all of which has different regulations about what ID is required, what does it mean to show up in person, or if you're in a predominantly vote by mail state, or if you're voting by mail because you can't get to a polling place on election day. We want to make sure that you know what your opportunities are to engage in the electoral process. So allintovote.org will manage helping you through that process, regardless of the state in which you're eligible to exercise your right to vote. So as I mentioned at the outset, you can easily scan a QR code, the similar one that was on screen 1, for you to register to vote. When you register to vote, it does ask you for basic information, example, first name, last name, your address, phone number, etc. The reason that we ask for phone number and email in particular is that we at All In will send you reminders specific to your election if you use our tools. That includes when your early voting process is, your vote by mail processes, and of course, how to find your polling location and research your ballot in advance of election day. After you register to vote, we do encourage young people to pledge to vote. We know based on 2022 and 2020 election data that there's a high propensity for young people in particular, meaning college students and grad students alike, to register to vote for elections, but there is a big gap in margin of where folks turn out to vote. So we continue to see young people registering because it's an easier task to do. Again, you can do it in a few moments by scanning the QR code that was on the previous screen there. But in order for you to turn out, it takes a lot more energy and it takes a lot more organization to ensure that you understand where your polling location is, what your vote by mail process is, and if you're in a state that requires a notary or anything like that, some of those regulations might slow down your ability to turn out to vote. So the pledge to vote is making that commitment that you're going to follow through on your registration. When students pledge to vote, we do add them to a leaderboard. So the Teachers College could climb the New York leaderboard. It would also climb our graduate and professional studies leaderboard. So just know that you have the ability to help your campus continue to show its civic engagement pride more broadly. And you'll be able to click on that by going to allintovote.org/pledge, or again, scanning the QR code on your screen. The other nice things about the All in to Vote tool is that you also get to check your registration. So for many of you right now, you might have already registered to vote and you may have registered at a previous address. If you've made a transition in the last 6 months, as in you've moved across the country, you've changed apartment numbers, you've moved back in with your parents or your guardians, etc., you have the ability to check your registration to make sure it's up to date, as well as to re-register to make sure your address is appropriately reflected on the voter files as we gear up for this November's election. So it's always a good thing to check your registration to make sure you're in good standing. And if there's any discrepancies, to make sure you talk with your Board of Elections to ensure that you're able to show up to vote this fall. The next thing is that you can request your ballot very simply, again, by scanning this QR code depending upon your state's regulations. Some of our colleagues in states that are like Washington and Colorado, where you're predominantly vote by mail, it's a little bit simpler because you get a prerequisite for your ballot to appear. But for others, there's a lot of opportunities for no excuse absentee voting, like there is in Massachusetts. But for others, you might need to provide information about why you're choosing to vote by mail instead of voting in person on election day. And again, this page will walk you through that process to ensure that you get your ballot in time, as well as ways to track your ballot when you're going through the processing point to ensure your ballot arrives on time at the appropriate governing body to ensure it gets counted this fall. The other things is that we don't want anyone to vote uninformed. So while you might feel like you align with a particular political party, as I mentioned early on, there's a lot more on the ballot than president and vice president. So we want to ensure that you have the most information about the issues that will be on your ballot in addition to the persons that are voting down ballot. So that way you know who's going to be, example, your sheriff might be on the ballot, or your city controller, or if you're in small towns like myself, your town meeting representatives could be on the ballot. And so making sure that you have the most information about the candidates so you can make an informed decision instead of voting based on your party affiliation necessarily. So this will just, again, one extra step to ensure that you have all the information that's available to you to make an informed decision when casting your ballot this fall. The other piece is finding your polling location. Many of you have gone through redistricting depending upon where the census fell. So your polling location where you voted in the spring for a primary might not be your polling location for this November. And so make sure to take the time to understand where you need to show up at, especially if you just went through that check your registration process and you updated your address, your polling location might not be the same location as it previously was. So always make sure you have a plan and that you know where you're supposed to show up on November 5th, so that way you're in the appropriate place, especially if you don't want to get caught in traffic or be startled on your way to kid drop off or anything like that, assuming you can vote if your location has changed in any particular way. The next couple things is if you've done all the things related to voting, as you heard Matt say at the outset, there's also a lot more opportunities to engage civically. And so think about how else you can involve in the democratic process besides casting a ballot. You could sign up to be a poll worker. You could be a poll watcher. You could help with debate watch parties. You could do some service learning or some volunteering. There's lots of ways to get involved in our communities. So just don't stop at the ballot box and know that there's more that can be accomplished to serve your interests as best as possible. And then the last couple things, just as an example of information you can get from the All in to Vote Hub. We're just going to pick on New York as the home base of Columbia, but just knowing your dates and deadlines and knowing the variances by state. So for instance, this year in New York, instead of having a postmark date for your registration or for your ballot, they need to be received by your governing body. And that's a distinct difference as to where we were a year and a half ago as we were going through midterm elections. And the dates are October 26th for folks to receive your registration form and to receive the request for a mail-in ballot in the state of New York. Early voting varies by state. Some states like Mississippi and Alabama don't have early voting processes. And so just keep that in mind, as your state may or may not have this as an option to you. Many people will also have a last date that they're able to return their vote by mail ballot or to vote early. So keep that in mind. And then always the poll times vary on election day. So example, in Massachusetts, they are 7 to 8. In New York, they are 6 to 9. And so just keep that in mind as you're planning your election day engagement to ensure that you have time to get to and from the polls, as well as the instance that as long as you are in line on election day before your poll closes, you have the right to vote. So make sure you stay in line regardless of how long it might be. And hopefully it's a quick transition for you to get through the polling process. The other things to know is that there are different requirements by state regarding your eligibility to engage in the electoral process. So again, here's a few instances for the state of New York that you are eligible to vote if you meet these requirements. So you're a U.S. citizen, you're a resident of the state, you're at least 18 years of age on election day. And then every state has varying ID regulations. So while you don't need an ID to show up to vote on election day in New York, you do need an ID in order to register to vote in the state of New York. So a student ID does count for the state of New York, but in other states, that's not the same instance. So example, in Ohio, there's some variance on whether or not your student ID will count as voter ID. In North Carolina, your student ID had to be qualified by the state, by the institution going through a process to ensure the ID could be vetted appropriately to count. So your ID may or may not count. So you always want to check out those nuances. If your student ID does not count, there's always other alternatives. So looking at a driver's license, a current or a valid photo ID, and then copies of things like your utility bill, your tuition statement, sometimes your bank statements, government checks, etc., that show name and the current address in which you are looking to vote. And then lastly, note that there's a ton of resources out there for students. So if you have questions about voter ID, there's a great partner with voteriders.org. We have information if you're studying abroad or you will be abroad during the time of the elections to make sure to check out our 101 queue. If you're a first-time voter and it can feel intimidating based on the state in which you're voting, know that there's lots of resources to help you answer any of your questions. We have a great learning hub known as Voting 101. And then always, if you interface with any challenges on election day or through the absentee vote by mail processes, know that you can connect with the election protection line, which is 866-R-VOTE, and you will have a legal team standing by to support you in your access to casting your ballot this fall or in any of the upcoming elections. And with that, I just want to say thank you. That's a lot of information and a lot to process, but hopefully it's helpful. At the moment, my voice just cracked, but I will pause now and see if anyone has any questions.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much for that, Stephanie. And a lot of our students are, living in New York for graduate school, but are also still have a home address in another state. What would you recommend for them to do if they want to make sure their vote is counted?
Yeah, so that's a really great point to bring up, Matt, that college students in particular get to fall into what is known as the snowbird clause. And so they have dual residency based on their current address where they are physically located, in addition to their residential address. So if they are attending school in New York and have picked up residency in New York for the time being, but are actually from California, they get to make the choice on whether they vote in California or they vote in New York. The biggest thing to know is for folks to look at what are the regulations by state and making sure they abide by them. So for instance, you have to choose your state in which you're voting in. So you cannot decide tomorrow to vote in New York, but then in November decide you want to vote in California. Like you have to make that choice in particular. The other piece is for folks to look at the regulations to make sure they align with your schedule. So if you know that you can't be in person in New York on election day, but you will be home in California on election day, that maybe that's the best choice for you. Or if you're able to meet the vote by mail requirements, regardless of the state, that's helpful. The other piece to consider is the Youth Electoral Significant Index to determine where your vote might mean different things. And that might help to impact like where you decide on where you choose your residency for the time being. And then the other thing to know is that when college students make a choice based on their residency, it doesn't have an impact on your student aid or your financial aid packages. It might change whether you have in-state or out-of-state tuition, but it doesn't impact, example, your FAFSA or your scholarships. Sometimes that becomes a rumored in the world, which is just not true.
Great. Wow. Thank you. What was the name of that index? I never heard of that before. It's
The Youth Electoral Significant Index. It is a study that is run by the Center for Institutional Research and Civic Learning and Engagement, also known as CIRCLE.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, thank you. We'll try and get a link to that to share with people when we post this video. And let's say, you are, all things equal, you're able to vote in either one of your home state or in New York. How does someone really I know you're not really able, none of us as nonprofit people are able to tell people how to vote or where to vote, but how does a person kind of grapple with that decision? And maybe they go to the youth index to see where their vote has impact, or what other things should they think about?
Yeah, I think as mentioned in the presentation is for folks to consider their values and in part of that, think of where they have community. So if New York, for instance, where you're going to school feels like your community and where you want to have an impact and where you see the day-to-day impact of your life and your choices, then New York might be where you choose to vote. If you see New York more of like, this is my pass through, like I'm here to take one course, I'm only going to be here for 6 months, and then I'm going to take remote courses or do experiential learning opportunities that put me otherwise, then maybe New York isn't your community and it should be California where you're deciding to cast your vote. But everyone needs to make that choice for themselves. And I know to your point of it's really hard to say like, you should vote here or there. Or if you look at the swing states or you look at, the variances of what's purple versus blue and red, it's easy, I think, to pigeon folks in those boxes, but really, I think it's an individualized choice on where do you find home as home, even if home is a temporary thing.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for that answer. Other folks in the room have questions for Stephanie that might be maybe things you've heard talking with students or alumni, like that might be of interest.
Yeah, I've got one. And it's one that I feel like I can never find an answer to. I actually don't know if in November there's a lot of like judges on ballots. Like I think a lot of people are pretty easily able to access information about candidates' policies if they're presidential or Senate or in their local races. But I think like judges and things like that are really tricky. Like, do you have any suggestions of resources, or is that kind of like a tricky, like state by state partisan kind of thing?
It's really tricky because many individuals that are running for office or will appear on a ballot are given the opportunity to state their positionality on where they fall within particular issues, which would help voters make more of an informed decision on the like this judge stands for this thing and this judge stands for that thing, and so I might want to vote with A versus B based on my own kind of alignment. However, it's not black and white, and not all humans follow opportunities the same way. And so it kind of becomes this like mystified process of what is required. And not all states require individuals to share their views on issues or ideals that are currently in the spectrum. I would say that you can use if you use our All In to Vote research tool, it will bring up all candidates that are on the ballot and any way they voted previously and any positions they've previously held, which might help make that informed decision. We also hold an election 2024 website on our the allintovote.org hub, which will share like more what positions do. So if folks are like, I hear that there's going to be a judge on my ballot, but there's also going to be like a senator on my ballot, or there's also going to be a city controller on my ballot. Like if you're less familiar with governmental terms, that might feel very much so like jargon. And so being able to break down the like who does what and why do I care that they're on my ballot is a helpful resource for folks to better understand. So optimistically, that semi answers the question of like, it's really hard because there's no federal mandate on who's required to do what, where, nor do job titles need to be one for one, which is always mind boggling for me. So we might have positions in Massachusetts, where I'm from, that you may or may not have in New Jersey or California, right? Like all states are different. But the ways in which people intersect in community is important. And knowing the most that you can about a candidate is always helpful in making that informed decision.
Well, yeah, no, that is helpful. I know in New York they send out a big old like magazine like packet before election day, and sometimes I read through it and sometimes I don't. Revealing that right now, but so that might be a good place to start, and then I'll check those other decks. I like the judges; they're just so it's just so tough.
It is so
All right.
tough. And then you get to the smaller circuit courts and it gets even tougher when you're like, oh,
Yes.
I don't even know who
Like,
does
what's a civil court judge versus like whatever. Anyways, thank you. I appreciate it.
this.
Lots of ways to try and educate ourselves around candidates, the issues, and this is always true for the local elections, the special elections, random things that pop up not just every 4 years. So building that civic muscle is always important. And once you register and check your status and have a plan to vote, it becomes easier and easier in a lot of ways. Other folks in the room have questions, curiosities before we start to wrap up. So we'll post this video along with some helpful links and resources. The government relations community engagement team has a map, kind of like a walkthrough if-then scenario. If you're registered or living in New York and want to think about where to vote, if absentee, if that's an option for you, and a couple other resources, other recordings like this from past several months, and we'll have hallway get out the vote things with stickers and cookies and things to reinforce the importance of getting out there and voting. So Stephanie, thank you so much once again for your time. We really appreciate you and the rest of the team here. So let's get out there and vote. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Have a great day. Bye.